I'm going to talk a little bit in Farsi and then I'm going to have the English translation afterwards. سخنران اول امروز ما آقای پروفسور ریچارد بنفیلد هستند. پروفسور ریچارد بنفیلد استاد دانشگاه ایالتی کنتیکات هستند و سال 1998 در حوزه جغرافیای انسانی، گردشگری، مدیریت پارک‌های ملی، گاردن توریسم، به تدریس، پژوهش و مدیریت اجرایی مشغول بودند. در المپیک زمستانی 2010 هم در بخشی به عنوان مدیر اجرایی و بازاریابی حضور داشتند. پروفسور بنفیلد 2 کتاب در زمینه باغگردی منتشر کردند. کتاب اخیرشون تحت عنوان مسیرهای نو در گاردن توریسم نام داره که در سال 2021 چاپ شده. در واقع پروفسور بنفیلد یکی از معتبرترین و محبوبترین سخنرانان در حوزه گاردن توریسم هستند که تا حالا بیش از 100 کشور دنیا هم سفر کردند. در رویداد امروز پروفسور بنفیلد در مورد تعامل گردشگر، منظر و سایت تاریخی در دوران پسا کرونا صحبت میکنن. من بعد از معرفی ایشون به زبان انگلیسی ازشون خواهش میکنم سخنرانی خودشون رو ارائه بدن. Our first speaker is Professor Benfield. Dr. Richard W. Benfield is professor and former chair of the Department of Geology at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, where he taught courses in human geography and history and management of national parks and plants and courses in Department of Tourism track. Prior to coming to Central, he was senior program coordinator in Division of Continuing Education at University of Oklahoma. He was vice president of marketing at Whistler Ski Resort, Canada, home of 2010 Winter Olympics, executive director of Banff Lake Louise Chamber of Commerce, and a tourism marketing executive with the government of Alberta, Canada. His current research interests are in biogeography, particularly on the role of national parks and the use of tourism as a conservation tool. He has also published extensively and spoken widely on biogeography. In total, he has traveled to over 100 countries and seen parks, botanical gardens, and other private reserves. In 2013, his groundbreaking book, Garden Tourism, was published, and subsequently in 2021, he published New Directions in Garden Tourism as a companion to his 2013 book. Today, Professor Benfield will speak about garden tourism for landscapes, historic sites, and visitors, marrying the three for the post-COVID period. Professor Benfield, please.
Okay, we're all ready to start, Mahdi? We're way to go. First of all, good morning, everyone, or in some cases, or I think most cases of you, it's good afternoon. It's 8:30 in the morning here, and it's very cold, so I am really delighted to have a reason to stay inside. Thank you very much. And most important of all, thank you very much for inviting me, particularly the University of Tehran and the Iranian Society of Landscape Professionals. I'm honored, I'm touched, and I'm somewhat excited to give you this presentation today. So my thanks particularly to the organizers Mahdi and Amin for inviting me and setting this up. Secondly, I say very quickly to those of you that are landscape architects or landscape professionals, I am not a landscape professional, so hopefully I won't try and pretend that I am one. But I do have to say to many of you that are the tour guides from Iran and many other places, I was a tour guide myself for many years, probably about 5 years, and so I know where you come from. I know how to do it, I think. And I've done it a number of times, and I'm not too sure I want to redo it, but it's nice to be with some old friends, some old tour guide friends. So welcome indeed to all of you. I'm delighted to have you join me today. So today, what we're going to do very, very quickly, I'm going to go through a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to try and pull in various elements of landscapes and historic sites, particularly in the context of Iran, but also visitors to sites, because when I started this program, this research agenda many years ago, 1997, I found I was actually the only person doing visitors to gardens. I was quite pleased with that because, as my daughter would say, while she said, you may be the best, Dad, you're also the worst. So I was delighted to be alone for so long. And now I'm actually seeing some rather nice work coming out of universities and research areas on gardens and garden tourism, and particularly historic sites. So the session that Armin has set up today is really quite timely, and we often say that, but indeed I think it is. So what I'm going to do today very quickly as we go through is I'm going to look at gardens and how important they are. I want to do a very quick look at COVID as well, because I want you to see where we see ourselves and where much the rest of the world see themselves in COVID. This is not a COVID presentation. We'll look at gardens in general. I'll give you some information about gardens in the United States and the UK, and I hope to add some trends, talk a little bit about Iranian initiatives, Iran particularly, and how we move forward. So you certainly can have this as well. The one thing that really impresses me as a garden professional now for over almost 25 years is just how universal Iranian gardens or the Chabaga is, that the influence of Persian gardens is spread throughout the world. This picture actually comes from a garden in Hamilton, New Zealand, 2 hours south of Auckland. And they've built themselves a Persian garden replica, and it's one of their most popular gardens. So I just think how important Persian gardens or Iranian gardens are to us all, and just very much how there's all sorts of potential in that regard for us to enjoy them. So first of all, the good news for us all today. This is probably the most profound statement I've ever made, and I keep saying it and no one believes it, but let me just tell you that this is an international phenomenon. First of all, gardening is the preeminent form of outdoor activity in North America and England today. The only thing that exceeds gardening is people going for a walk, just walking. And so gardening, and then maybe by default garden tourism, is one of the most important phenomena in tourism today, which leads us to that second bullet, that garden tourism may be the most popular tourism activity in the world today, or over 1 billion people going to gardens in any one year. That includes a COVID year, and that far outstrips any other activity. Indeed, if you look at the evidence with 1 billion people, that's a seventh of the world's population are going to gardens. And so there's some really remarkable importance that we can attach to gardens. In North America here, it's the #1 outdoor activity. It has the highest revenue of any tourism activity in the United States. On average, people are spending about $500 per year on gardening. And we always think in tourism terms of Disneyland and Disney World, or Orlando or Las Vegas. More tourists visit gardens in the United States. About 120 million visitors visit gardens, which is almost 3 times the number that go to Disneyland and Disney World combined, or double the number that go to Las Vegas. Gardens often post over 1 million people going into the garden. Beijing, for example, has 3 million. Australia has 5 million. And one garden in the United States, with an event that they ran, which Carl will talk to you a little bit about later on, not this event, but the importance of events. In 1 year, they went from 750,000 to 1.4 million people. They almost doubled their number of people with an event. So gardening, the first thing I leave with you is gardens are very important. Then if we focus or zero to Iran, I put up here some of the most historic. I'm probably wrong. They may be the most historic. Certainly some of the oldest in the world. Certainly importance for plants and plant conservation. They have a very strong link to natural areas, and I'm particularly thinking here of national parks and the importance of national parks with gardens, and we'll get a little bit into this. Persian gardens or Iranian gardens are some of the most important in the world for replication elsewhere. They have the elements of beauty and attraction and compelling horticulture that lends themselves to replication. In our part of the world, and I'm sure in some parts of Iran, they're some of the most important for things like bird life. And if you ever want to attract bird watchers, then gardens are the place to do it with. And certainly they are some of the most important to the nation's tourism product. There's a really nice article out there as how important gardens are to the Iranian national economy. This brings us, before we get to COVID, this is a slide from 2019, and I want to draw your attention to the furthest column on the right, but one where it says 19/18, and you can see there a 25% increase in international tourism to Iran. And in 1817, the year before, there was a 50% increase in tourism to Iran. And so it's very heartening for me that with something close to 10 million visitors to Iran in 2019, then Iran certainly has the elements that are there for increased international visitation. This is really a heartening statistic, and the Iranian tourism authorities and what they're doing should be proud. That brings us up to the end of that year, and then when we left just pre-COVID, you can see the Middle East recorded the highest growth in arrivals. I put that in there because the World Tourism Organization used the Middle East, yet they put Iran in Asia and the Pacific. But it gives you some idea, because many parts of the world would see Iran as part of the Middle East, that just how important this region is, and it was one of the fastest growing up to 2019. That leaves us to what, March 15th, with this influx of this disease, COVID. This chart that you see here, this graphic you see, actually comes from Temple University in Philadelphia. They're charting COVID across the world during the period of the pandemic, and they do not cover Iran. So my apologies or their apologies to Iran. The nearest I can find, of course, geographically and religiously, is Azerbaijan. You can see that they've covered Azerbaijan. And what this tells you is that on February the 1st, before the bottom left graph, before the COVID outbreak, that was where all of the indices would rank Azerbaijan. So they were at roughly 100%, and it drops, as you can see there, very quickly to less than 20, and is now stabilized at around 25% of where they were pre-COVID. They actually used 4 different indexes: an aviation index, amount of air flights, and so you can see they're down to 8 compared with 100 what they were in January the 1st. They have hotels, they have pandemics, they have interest and mobility. But it gives you an idea where this region stands with COVID. This is a second Temple University COVID index of 26.56. So you can see there that they did pretty much the same performance as Azerbaijan, but you can see that over the period of time, that middle graph there, starting to recover up to about 60% of where they were. So there is an element of recovery in the world as we go through. This is the most heartening slide that I show around the world. It asked in the summer of 2020, if we go back to normal activities, what's the first thing you would like to do? And as you can see there, public parks or botanic gardens were the most popular choice for people to return to normal activities in a post-COVID, post-pandemic era. That 67% in June would say they are going back to botanic gardens. I can even, as I say, that was June of last year. I can even update that to you currently, because today most botanic gardens in North America and some in United Kingdom are open, and they are posting significant numbers. They are in many ways back to where they were before pre-COVID, because the botanic garden or a visit to a garden is considered safe, it's considered viable, and the elements that people want to see are there. As you can see at the bottom, people are not going to movies, they're not going to concerts, but garden visitation is projected to be the first thing that people will do after they go out. Basically what the surveys are saying is they want to be outdoors, and botanic gardens have the potential to do that. So that's really quite heartening data. This comes from a hotel company in the United States, and I think they're very optimistic here, because as you can see that they think we will start to recover from COVID in the third quarter of 2021, which is of course September, where they will have large events and long-haul international travel and all of those kind of things. As I say, I think that's a little bit ambitious. but they're noting it. It comes from a base of hotel statistics as to where they're going up into 2021, the first quarter, and some of the hotels are starting to come back. So we in the United States, and to a certain extent, I suspect Europe, because I follow the UK fairly closely, are looking to see recovery in the fall of 2021. And it's also borne out by advanced bookings on airlines like the Royal Dutch Airlines, Air France, even Lufthansa, bookings of people. 66% of people actually having made bookings to go somewhere internationally in September. So we're starting to see a recovery. As you can see, I said, as of last week, I got this over one of my feeds, 66% of Dutch people booked an overseas international flight trip this year. And the only caveat or the only criteria is they say we want to have a 100% refund, and that seems fairly standard. So let's have a look at gardens and gardens in tourism. These are very, I think you'll find a fairly generic slides, but I think it gives us some context of where we are today. I think there are three types of tourist gardens, or gardens that are particularly set aside or famous for tourists. They are destination gardens, they are regional gardens, and they are regional destination gardens. What we're looking at today, I think we would classify Iranian gardens as some of the great gardens of the world. A destination garden is a garden that is the focus of a journey, where you go to say, here's what I'm going to see, and when I see it, it's going to give me something which I didn't expect. It's not just a visit to a garden. So in the United States here, those names we have there are generally gardens in medium-sized U.S. cities. There are some of them they're fairly large in New York and Denver and some of those others. But there are a few, probably about 5, just destination gardens that when you go to London, you will go to Kew Gardens. We have a couple of gardens like that in the United States and in Canada. But Iranian gardens rank up there with destination gardens. In effect, they are what we would call a must-see. That if you're a garden tourist of dedicated fashion, then you must see that. And the other beauty of the gardens is that it may push you over into other specific tourism segments. People that like to watch birds, for example. There's 30 million Americans that watch birds. People that want to see endemic plants, unique plants. And in the context of Iranian gardens, there are people that want to see ancient Persian Iranian history. I mean, and that's over and above the people that see gardens. So in many ways, Iranian gardens are quite unique in that regard. What do we know about USA gardens? I put this up because, as I say, my previous slide suggests that Iranian gardens are very different, but I think it's good for some of you. There's even, I saw some representatives today from Moscow. Hello, Moscow. Nice to see you there. And Philippines. Hello there. Nice to see you there. You have beautiful gardens in Moscow. But let me tell you a little bit about the United States gardens, and you can take it for what you wish. First of all, 93% in our part of the world come by car. That may be the same in Iran. They usually stay about 2 to 3 hours. It's part of an overall visit to a region. So gardens generally in the United States are not necessarily the thing that people come to see, but they come to see the region, and the garden shows them a little bit about this. Here is a very key statistic, because it's also very key for international travelers, where it goes up to about 50%, but 43% have visited other gardens in the last 6 months. If you have a garden tourist, he or she is a very dedicated garden visitor. It tends to be an older demographic, over 60, predominantly female, but this is changing, and I'll show you some statistics for that today. 70% rate the value for money above average. They think gardens are a wonderful thing to do. So the thought for the day in our part of the world, maybe in Iran as well, and maybe your part of the world, maybe they don't charge enough. In many gardens in the United States, it will cost you $35 to $40 to enter a garden, and it doesn't hurt the visitation. Greater than 60% visit the gift store and the gardens where there is one, so people like to buy things where they go, and if they have a cafe, many people do not go in. Experiences, events are becoming more and more important, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but that's very much what Carl will talk to you, I think, about after my presentation, that it's not just the garden, but there has to be an imperative for people to go into the garden as well. If you will, they want value added. and they want experiences. They want to sample something. They don't just want to look at the plants as a static experience. They want to have an experience. And in our part of the world, we are finding very much more and more research is finding that health benefits of gardens is becoming more and more of a selling point. When we ask people why they go to gardens in the United States, they say they want beauty, they want special events. That's where Carl will talk to you about. They just want to go outside. They want to learn about plants and gardening. Very little. This is not an education thing that people go to gardens. They go for, if you will, a touristic experience. Many of my garden friends think they go to see their plants, but the reality is they go for the beauty, the special events. They want to get outside. In the United States, in the United Kingdom, it's even more variable. They want to just go out. They want to enjoy the garden interest. Some of them say they just want a nice cup of tea. So underlying, we think they want a nice environment. They want tranquility. Now, I quickly add a little asterisk here. This does not relate, I don't think, to historic gardens. Gardens of a historic nature, we have to do more research. Why is it so valuable to nations and tourist economies? Well, we have a large number of gardeners spending, as I say, about $500 every time they go into the garden. We have lots of visitors, larger, and I've indicated that to you. More men than women garden, so this is not particularly a female phenomena. What we find in garden visitation is the women decide where to go and the men ratify. Revenues are very large. They're larger than amusement parks. It's larger than the largest movie of all time, and certainly larger than gaming in our part of the world. And for us in the tourism industry, and you guys in the guiding tour business, it's all ages. They start at 24. People get interested in gardens at 24, usually when they form their own household, and it never diminishes. They keep that interest. As I said, it's part of an overall tourist visit to a region, and they tend to spend about 2.5 hours or half a day in the garden. It is strong repeat visitation. If people go to a garden anywhere in the world, that does not mean they will not go back. When I was tour guiding, as I told a number of you, I used to work in Banff National Park, as Matthew said, and we had a terrible problem getting people coming back. Once they'd seen the national parks, they didn't want to come back. There was nothing wrong with it. They just wanted to go elsewhere. That's not the case with gardens. It's year round and it's week round. It doesn't matter what time of year. It beats most, and even people will go into gardens in Iran in the hot summer. If the garden is associated with a historic house, and I'll show you one in a minute on my slides. People tend to go to the garden. Not very many people go to the house, and so the garden tends to be the draw in a historic site, and that may well be the case here in Iran. Now, this is the most important slide I will show you all day. It really governs everything that you should do. So this is the key. I'm sorry the resolution is not good, but it is really important because it shows you this. Generally in the Western world, and I speak here of United States, Europe, possibly Australia, and many other places I suspect, this is the sequence of decisions. At the top there you see one. They decide where they're going to go. That means the nation internationally. The first decision, where they're going to go, how long they're going to go, how much money they got, how they're going to get there, and their accommodations. Generally for tourism and tourist guides and people like me who are tourist professionals, you can influence the destination. You cannot influence their duration, their budget, their mode of transportation, and generally you only have a little influence over their accommodations. But the important point for us, me in gardens particularly, is gardens become number 6. So it's very hard to push people to go to gardens if you don't push the destination. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but the idea that the destination, where people go, and in this case Iran, if we're talking about hosts here, that becomes the most important consideration. I want to go to Iran, and then you look at all the other stuff and what am I going to do? If you look for people who are looking for family-centered trips, for example, on the right, you can still see that the destination is still preeminent, and so are the activities. And if you're there for business and you want to combine a little bit of leisure, it's still the destination that's important, and then activities come. It's only when you want to do recreational activities that activities move up. That's not the case in gardens. It's not a recreational product. It is if you were skiing in the mountains outside Tehran, and so the destination and the activities you will see come together. But the important part, as I say, the most important slide is, and it governs everything you do, is the fact that the destination, it becomes the first decision across all types of leisure travelers. Here's the problem we have in the United States, and what I've had for the last 25 years teaching geography. Respondents in the United States were asked to identify Iran on a map, and only 28% could do so. That speaks very highly to the United States knowledge of geography, which is just appalling. We are the second worst country in the world for geographic literacy, and it shows there when you actually ask people where Iran is, they can't put it. Don't worry, they can't put other places on the map either. So that's something we have to go there. Let's have a look at historic gardens, because that's very much what we're about if we're talking Iranian or Persian gardens. Where do they rank? Who goes there? And where do they go? When you ask the United States travelers, this is domestic, when they go on vacation, what they're going to do, history and museums come quite high. As you can see, the outdoors as well figures prominently above that. So gardens and historic gardens could be very, very important. In the United States, shopping is the #1 activity. It drives me nuts. We think of tourism as going to cultural events and festivals and beaches and theme parks. Not so. They want historical sites, they want museums, and they want the outdoors. Though I will note there, national state parks at 10% become very important, because we see a very close symbiosis, a very close link between gardens and national parks. This comes from the United Kingdom, from Great Britain. I think it's instructive about international tourists in general. They get about 6 million international tourists a year. In a survey that they ran in 2011, they asked these visitors to the UK what they wanted to do. And the demand or desire to go to a garden by overseas visitors is #3 in population. 31% of all visitors to the United Kingdom want to see a garden. The desire to see a garden, that 31%, is only exceeded by museums, art galleries, and even historic sites. So gardens are a major, major draw. And by the way, the only two things that actually exceed gardens is going to a pub, and we saw that in the previous slide where shopping is important. Gardens are very, very important to international tourists, even more so than museums, art galleries, and even historic sites. Here is the other surprising thing, which I'm just contradicting myself here, is it's not an elderly demographic. Of that 31% who want to go, they are 39 years of age. That's the median age in the United States. The problem we have in the tourism garden research area is we have no data on who goes to gardens vis-a-vis historic sites. If ever you want to make yourself a wonderful or a learned university professor, start with doing gardens to visit gardens and historic sites, because generally tourism professionals, and I suspect tourism guides are the same way as they are here, they just focus on the history, or they focus on the garden. And we have a very poor data collection on gardens themselves. We have some data, and I'm going to show it to you here. First of all, this is the gardening percentage. Gardening in the United Kingdom. There are about 60 million people in the United Kingdom. And so it says of those, let's say 40 million that are adults, 50% report gardening as a free time activity. Gardening is increasing. We might also think, therefore, that garden tourism will increase. People do when they garden, and they go and confirm at other gardens. Who visits historic sites? Now, this is historic sites, not gardens. This is gardening. This is historic sites. And you can see here in terms of who visits historic sites, and if you look at the gray bar on the far right of each of the columns, it's actually diminished in certain areas, but other areas, the elderly people go there. But there is some growth in the 25 to 34-year-olds, and particularly the 35 to 44 age cohort. You see where it says 35 to 44, those who visit historic sites. It's the largest of any group. So if you marry the historic sites with the gardens, as you can in Iran, you can appeal to a relatively young cohort as well as that elderly 65 to 74 age groups. So people who visit historic sites are not the elderly, they're not particularly the young, but they are, I think, the demographic that we want. Who goes there? They are highly educated. When you go to a historic site, the largest percentage of people that go there in 2017, that's the red bar, is over 50% have some kind of graduate or professional degree. So let me take this back to Iran very quickly. If you have some of the most historic gardens in the world, which you do, and the most world-renowned in many ways, you can appeal to a graduate or professional degreed person, and that individual will have a real solid propensity to go to your garden. So it's a highly educated group. You can target what you say to these people because they will have a very solid education. The other thing I wanted to put in here, just so you know, is its visits to all historic sites in the United States. So it's battlefields, it's monuments, memorials, historic parks. Generally, you think of national parks. And as you can see, our visitation to those kind of historic sites has been growing very, very much, from 60 million to today about 120 million. So in the space of about 30 years, we have doubled the number of visitors to historic sites. There are 130 million households in the United States. There's 120 million people going to our parks. So we're running about 75% of all of our households will go to a historic site at some point in a year. That bodes well, I think, for historic Iranian gardens. So if we marry gardens and history, if we can, and age, you can see there the yellow bar is the gardening cohort. You can see the age there. So the 65-year-old age cohort gardens more than any others, for obvious reasons. But also notice it's very shortly followed by a 45 to 65-year-old age group. They take a lot of days out. Now, most of the days out, the vacations are taken by young people. They like to go away. This is very much days out. This is the UK, by the way. It's not necessarily international travel. But in terms of visiting historic places, the largest, of course, as you see there, is an elderly cohort. But notice just how the 45 to 64 cohort is very well represented where that red dot is. It shows that there's a real propensity for those for a younger age group to go to historic places on their days out because they have an interest in gardens. So we've established, therefore, I think, a link between these people. Let's have a look at those guys. They're called the millennials in the United States. They're aged between 25 and 44. And those that are coming, 16 to 25, because they are the largest demographic group now in the United States and in the UK and in Europe, I believe. So they're the largest demographic group, and therefore they're the future of our Iranian gardens, and indeed they're the future of travel amongst any. What does this tell you? It tells you they take the most days out, they take the second most historic visits to historic sites, and they have the lowest garden interest. That's because it's gardening, because generally their houses are smaller. And there's a reason for that, and we could go into that if we were talking gardening per se. But they do have a propensity to go out and visit, and they visit historic sites. They like it. In a survey of millennials by our National Historic Preservation Board here in the United States, called the National Trust for Historic Preservation, they polled these people, this young group, aged 25 to 40, 25 to 44, because they want to know what they want, because they want them to go to their historic sites. Music, local food, handcraft items, personal interest, as well as ways they're interested in engaging in history and culture. They want to engage with history and culture, and there's a large number of them that do. If we ask them where they travel, look at that figure there where it says 78%. 78% of these young people will travel, and their interest is in natural beauty or wonders such as national or local parks. In a place like Shiraz, which is very close to a number of national parks, boy, that's really is a link that should be exploited. 71% want to travel in an area that has a distinct history, historic churches, historic neighborhoods. Remember, this is the United States, but it appeals to 71% of it, and 1 in 4, 25, make it a point to visit historic places when they travel. This is really important. Takeaway. About 1/3 of millennials are true believers. They're interested and engaged in history and culture. They're little more male, little older, higher economic status, and they're more educated. They live in urban areas. They consider themselves modern, trendy, hip, and urban. They love music and dining at unique local establishments. Boy, what more unique is dining in Iran. This was another survey that was done by an outfit called Mandela Research. They looked at the US population of 240 million. And as you can see there, of everyone that goes on a leisure vacation, that's the left-hand side, 71% of Americans travel every year. 76%, that was the same number we saw before, consider themselves cultural heritage travelers. They want to see culture, they want to see heritage. They are described as well-rounded, they're open to experiencing all types of activities, they particularly like culture and heritage, and there's 24 million of them. Awareness of cultural heritage segments, they are the largest group there. You can see where it says well-rounded or active. They're not people keeping it light. There's a certain group called passionate travelers, and we'll talk about those guys in a minute, but there is a real strong propensity to do that. Let's now focus a little on Iranian garden tourism, because I think it's instructive if we just kind of zero on there for the last 15 minutes or so. First of all, the literature is very light. Cultural landscapes and the desire to treat history, tourism, and gardens is not a static concept, but within a cultural landscape. Now, Arman and Mahdi would know way more about this than I will, but it's certainly a very large feature of history, tourism, and gardens in the United States right now, that it's not just a static phenomena, but we have to look at it within a cultural landscape. First of all, let's have a quick look at the literature. The literature is not extensive. There is an excellent study on historic garden management by a lady called Cassandra Funstein. She is in Palermo, Italy. And there is some literature out there on ancient gardens of Persia, their concept, their history, and the history of other gardens, but it tends to be fairly limited. From the study on historic gardens and its economic aspects, from Funstein, the study on the right, they identify 4 studies in Iran that address that area. So they'll certainly be there for you if you wish to have a look at them. But as you can see, it is not extensive. But generally, it's not extensive anywhere. It's not extensive in Germany. It's not extensive in the UK. We haven't done a lot on that link between historic gardens and historic sites. The consumer literature is probably different to that. In the Western world where we live, you can actually get a very large library of books written by garden professionals, not necessarily landscape professionals, on gardens. The most famous is by an English lady called Penelope Hobhouse on the gardens of Persia. It's a very thick book. It's a wonderful book. It was developed in 2004, and it is really very good. But there are large numbers of books out there where you can go from, in our case, on Amazon and acquire these books. So the consumer awareness of Iranian gardens is very much there for obvious reasons, because they're so important. The question is, how do you get people to go from there to the visitation? This is the slide that I talk a little bit about, and Arman, I'm sure Mahdi would enlighten you a little more than I in terms of that. But we have an organization in the United States called the Cultural Landscape Foundation that talks about the preservation of landscapes, particularly in the context of culture, but also historic sites. As you see on the bottom there, and it's not very well written, so I'll read it to you. Historic sites are cultural landscapes significant for their association with a historic event, activity, or person. So the idea here is that you're linking the historic event or activity or historic place, this area here, with the culture. And this actually comes from a North American Indian, or a North American native site in Missouri, and just how much this site is part of the landscape, the fairly obvious area. This comes from England. It's a place called Chatsworth House, and the data show that it actually bears out what I was saying about the importance of gardens and history. Chatsworth House is one of the great English country homes, the home of the Duke of Devonshire, the 11th Duke of Devonshire, and he lives there. The house is open to visitors to see the historic site, but only 10% of the 850,000 people that go there every year, only 10% go in the house. The rest come to see this garden, or they come to see the landscape, how the landscape is developed, because it was developed by a very famous English landscape architect. Armand will talk, I'm sure, about whenever he speaks about Lancelot Capability Brown. But the idea that landscape is an integral part of the cultural tourist garden experience. The National Park system, the National Trust system in the United Kingdom has proven the importance of gardens to historic sites. On the top, on that chart on the right, you can see there the National Trust visitors, and of those houses, of which Stourhead is the most important with about 400,000 visitors, it's the gardens that drive them. As you can see, there are 6 of the top 10 houses are gardens, and it's the gardens that are doing the attraction, and it's the landscape within which they're set that is now being part of the National Trust interpretive. This is National Trust. It doesn't take into private houses. So there's as you see, this Chatsworth House, a private house, gets 850,000 visitors, almost 1 million visitors a year. The key, therefore, is to manage it on the elements of how you make decisions with plans and vision analysis. And I won't go into that because that's a whole new area. So I said to myself, here we go. So I would love to go to Iran. I'd love to see these iconic gardens. I've actually read Penelope Hobhouse's book. I've read Mohammed Garipur's book, and I'm really excited to go. How would I go? So I'd wish to visit these iconic gardens. So I go to the website. I go to a website. What do I see? This is Google. This is what Google punches in for you. Look at, you see Cultural Heritage, Handicrafts and Tourism Organization. This is what I would be faced with. Areas considered for expansion are, this is the second paragraph, ecotourism, coastlines, restoration of historic relics, handicraft and health tourism. I suddenly see nothing on. Now, apparently, I've just made the case, and I think hopefully you would all agree, that Iran has some of the most iconic gardens in the world. You can't find it on Google in terms of what is posted on their website. It talks about, this is tourism, by the way. The post in here is tourism and Iran, and it tells me nothing about gardens. It tells me about healthcare system, but it doesn't tell me anything about the large numbers that go to gardens. It talks about a 20-year vision document of 32 billion and the amount of money that you can do and the hotels. But isn't that remarkable? We'll go to Google. Well, let's type in then Iranian garden. Let's go to the Iranian National Tourism site, and this is what I get. When I type in Iran, this is the top left there, you see the Iranian Tourism Organization. I can discover Iran, and I can look at the history of Iran. I can look at art and literature. I can look at people. Bottom left, I can look at the geography. Hopefully I know all about that. I can look at architecture. And finally, food and drink. But I can find nothing on the gardens of Iran. Even if I go to some of the pull down or drop down menus of here, I can't find God. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a nice little box in there that said history, gardens, people, whatever it may be? I know the gardens are part of history. I know they're part of art and literature. But boy, if I'm a tourist and I want to see the gardens, I want to see a little bit more. Where would I find gardens in that? So then I go to tour packages because I wanted to see my friends from the Iran Tour Guiding Association. So you know what this is one of these I would like to do. Iran at a glance, best of Iran in depth, 14 days, I'm going to the Central Plateau. I can go north to south, and I still can't see anything about gardens. My understanding is there's a rather remarkable garden in Kashan, is there not, my Iranian friends? It tells me it's one of the most important tourist destinations in Iran. I can explore traditional houses, ancient sites, historic villages, camel riding, and safari. I cannot see the garden in Kashan, apparently. If I go to Iran in depth, I can't see gardens. My point to you guys, not to berate this, is if I am a garden tourist, and I suggest there's a whole bunch of them, a tour package that would have Iran at a glance, the best of Iran gardens or the best of Iran historic sites and gardens, this would be really, really nice, and I think it would drive you some business, but who am I to say? And here's the thing that really amazes me. Of course, this comes from courtesy of Armin. Thank you very much, Armin. When I look there and I see that, for example, the Finn Garden, the Baghdad Finn, is attracting over 1 million visitors a year. The Baghdad Al-Ram is attracting something like 500,000, 600,000 visitors, of which 32,000 or 33,000 are inbound from other areas. The demand is there. The demand is there. The statistics that we have, or that I've been shown, certainly suggest that there's a large number of people. Pasargadae, with 350,000 visitors a year, boy, that would be an important garden in the United States. We don't find any reference to it in tourist literature that we want to go from Iran. So there's some nice work to be done there for the tourist guides to do that. People ask, this comes from a drop-down menu on Iran. Is it safe? Iran's a safe place to travel, so some people call it the safest place I've ever been to. Don't travel because of COVID. That's going to disappear. And so bottom line, Americans can travel to Iran freely. So what can we conclude, therefore? And that will bring us hopefully to about the time that I said I would speak. Therefore, what is the garden tourism product? What the Iran tourism product has to be about, maybe about, it's up to you, as we said before, is experience. They want activities. They want to go and see the tomb of Cyrus the Great, or wherever it may be. There's a certain element of memories. People want to take this back as a memory, which is very much intangible. And I will also put, the research is showing that the sight, the sound, the touch, the smell of gardens and the country is very much part of a tourist garden experience. And so what we have to do is give to the tourist this purest of all human pleasures. This is the thought I had last night while writing this. How many of the gardens in Iran provide Iranian culture in the form of rose tourism or perfume to smell and to taste? When I think of Iran, this is my personal thing, I think of the Rose Festival and rose water. And I'm thinking, boy, wonder how many gardens I can go into Iran where they'll actually let me sample, smell, or touch roses and the perfume, the rose perfume. So that's something that I find I found as I saw myself thinking about. This is the idea. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Or for gardens, if you don't know where your guests are coming from, what you're selling, any old plant, site, program, or plant will do. Let me have a couple of look at some trends that you may want to have a look at over the next, I think, 10 years, because that's what we're talking about. We've also looked at in terms of millennials and how they're starting to visit gardens. So there's a market for you. And gardening participation is increasing. There's much more segmented tourists, but they demand safety, they demand experiences. They want an experience when they go there, and I think Carl will talk to you a little bit about that when he talks about events. Rise and fall of China. I think China is finished now as that. Tourists to the UK, we looked at that in terms of people going to the UK that they want to see gardens. We have changing demographics, social media, and the importance of the web. And that's why I put up there as to what you might find on the web if you go to Iran. Magazines become very important, and the link to other tourist activities and the rise of regional garden tourism networks. Let me just go look at a couple of those. getting your messages out to the media. This comes from a large destination garden, because I put that in, and it shows you that there's a segment that they have of their garden visitation, one garden tourism segment, that they like the events. If you list events, this is where Carl will talk to you a little bit about, then that's where they get their information on the garden. They're looking for the events in the garden as opposed to the gardens, and a garden that is producing events. Facebook, emails, national magazines. The importance of magazines is still important. Organizations they belong to, blog, and Twitter. So you have to speak to them in the social media, and the social media is really very important because it doesn't require huge investment. Gardens are visual, and social media is all about the visual. And what is more visual than Iranian gardens? They're about telling a story, and you've got some wonderful stories in Persian history. Gardens are replete with stories. We need to post it, we need to phone it, and you can see what the public are saying about your garden and join in. Blogging is also very important. This is where you get influencers, and these people will talk about the importance of your garden. This is a garden blog in the United States. It's called Garden Rant. It has about 150,000 people follow it. And of these people, this blog tells them where they go and what's happening. And if the lady that writes it, her name is Elizabeth Licata, this lady here, she lives in Buffalo. If she were to write about Persian gardens, then suddenly there becomes a big demand for that. Where do garden visitors get their information? They get it from a multiplicity of sources. This is kind of problematic, but it's articles that they find in magazines. They get it from magazines. Brochures are very important, and also garden clubs and word of mouth. It's no longer isolated to just one medium. News is not, TV news is very vulnerable, but magazines are still proving very strong in garden media. And the one I always miss, and the one we always seem to miss, is this outfit called Lonely Planet. And I'm sure most of the tourist guides have seen it, because most of the tourists would have Lonely Planet in their hand. It really is the #1 source for Iranian garden tourism. And they are also open to changes, to addenda. They won't agree with it, don't necessarily agree. But if you say to them, I wrote to them about a garden in Moscow once, and they changed it in the next edition of the book. So it can be changed. And I've spoken to the founder, Mr. Wheeler, and told him gardens are much more important, and I think he agrees. So we do that there. We talk about garden brands, where you brand yourself. When you think of Hawaii, you think of flowers, and certainly England. I'll show you a slide. But what about the gardens of Iran? How are you branding yourself? Is there a sign? Welcome to Shiraz, the garden capital of Iran. Gardens are also part of other tourist activities, as we've said here before, because they don't just come to see one place or facility experience. And if you go to London, you don't just go to see the changing of the guard. You go to see all that London has to offer. So food, wine, art, Persian poetry, these are all other tourism products that have a role to play. Gardens and food and the grapes of Iran, the beautiful grapes of Iran that people would like to sample, pomegranate juice, all of those kind of things. So that's important. Now, the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and that just about consumes my time, is the fact that 43% of all visitors have been to another garden in the previous 6 months. Majority spend less than 3 hours in a garden. In Iran, I would estimate this may be up to 5 hours, but the tour guides could tell me that, how much they would generate there. And it begs the question, of course, food and refreshments. But the point is this: if I come to Iran and I land in Tehran and I want to see the gardens of Iran, I'm not just going to go and see one. I would like to see as many as I can. In the rest of the world, many other places, Southern California, Ireland, Canada, South Africa, Scotland, they have all developed what I have called regional garden tourism networks, because they will go for those areas. So, for example, this is Canada. Canada's garden route. Canada, the second largest country in the world, has a garden route. This is a country 5,000 miles across. So do not tell me Iran is a large country, because if Canada can do it, so can Iran. These are all of the gardens that you can see in In Canada, you can punch on one. You can see this is Waterton Lakes. This actually is a national park, so you can see how important this link with national parks is. But this is the garden, and they have heritage gardens. Pardon me, I didn't mean to do that. Heritage gardens, so where there's a distinct historic site, you can go and see the garden. In Philadelphia, if it's not just the whole of the country, but this is just one city, they have a program called 30 in 30, 30 gardens in 30 miles from downtown. And so there they all are on the web. There's what a web looks like when you have gardens. There's the map that you can go and see all of those gardens. And then for good measure, they have 1 week in the year where they have a historic garden tourism week. And that is Carl's specialty, those events. But certainly you can do garden weeks. And they feature, as you can see here, historic homes. So people are driving to each of these open gardens to see the historic sites and the houses. DC, the Washington, D.C. only has 3 gardens, but they have 3 gardens that you can go and tour. On Vancouver Island in British Columbia, there is a whole bunch of gardens. You can see them up the island. So if you go to one garden, you have the opportunity to go and see them all, and it spills business to them all. South Africa has a 400-mile garden route. Gosh, I'd love to see a garden route from Tehran to Shiraz to Mashed. That would be really nice. The same kind of Iran's garden route. I can see it now, and there you can see the site. And by the way, in Ireland, this is their website, and you open up Ireland where you'd like to see houses, castles, and gardens, and yes, you see gardens. It explores houses and gardens. It explores ancient Persian monuments and gardens. So Ireland has got onto that. So I tell you, there's going to be a rapid rebound in tourism. Is your nation, Iran, or your garden on their map? Do you have a unique sell? Is it the rose water, whatever it is? Do you have a reason they must come? And that's where events come in, as Carl will talk about, because that will drive them there because they want an experience. Do you want to have an event they would like to see? In Iran, this is a repeat. Get your tourism board to put the gardens on the website, and I think they need to be married with natural wonders, natural heritage and attractions, but give gardens their own page. They do it elsewhere. It's not insurmountable. This is Southern California, the Botanic Gardens of Southern California. Why can't we have the gardens of the nation of Iran? This is all the events that they do in a garden, in one small garden in the United States. They have an event every month to bring people in of various types of attraction so people can go and see, whether it be plants, but it may also be weddings, it may be daffodil shows, it may be even light shows. I mean, you've got the product. Look at this. This is wonderful. I'd love to go and see this, the picking of the roses and for the rose petals to create rose water tourism. Boy, that would be really nice. But there's nothing on the website that tells me I can do it. Now, where it is a fabulous new book called New Directions in Garden Tourism. That just came out, and there's all sorts of information that I've just provided you for there. It follows on from my 2013 book where I showed garden tourism, and so you can't have one without the other. So what are the conclusions? A third of all visitors use the garden as a major part, but not as their focus to a region. It may be one of the first attractions visitors see. It's one product that can be seen in a region, but it's distinct from other gardens. If you've seen one garden, you haven't seen them all. We're very poor at promoting gardens as a tourism attraction. But some people can teach us all about the importance of flowers, and we have to learn from them. So there's my little guide teaching the Easter bird how to appreciate the flowers, in this case the daffodils. But for now, that concludes it. That's just about a full hour. So with that, thank you. And I saw some people messaging on there with wanting to know, can they get a copy? I'd be delighted to give anyone a copy that would like it. It's fine by me. So with that, I'll turn it back to whom I turning it back to. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to wait here for Mahdi.
Thank you very much, Richard. It was a wonderful presentation, especially with the slides from Iran. It made it very special for our event. Thanks so much.
Okay.
There are some
My
questions.
pleasure. Do you want to go on directly on? I can answer a couple of
Yes, it would be
questions
really
if you
nice if
want.
you could. There are some questions, but just let me give you some amazing statistics. We were more than 160 participants from around 20 countries, and that is wonderful.
Well, I do have to say a special hello to Ms. Gonzalez in Houston. My son lives in Houston, so I know how you've been suffering. So I hope my pretty pictures revived you a little bit.
Yeah. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Jalal Makhsoumi from the International Federation of Landscape Architects Middle East region, and Monica Palares from the International Federation of Landscape Architects, who are just participating in in this webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jalal. Thank you, Monica. And thanks everybody just for joining us. There are some questions and some suggestions. I can see Dr. Suzanchi from Modares University in Iran just provided some links to some Persian gardens and about 48 gardens that are mentioned in the tourist organization website of Iran. That's correct, but maybe it is not possible to see it in the very first glance. You need to just dive through the pages and find it. But thank you very much, Dr. Suzanchi, for that. And the other thing is that Javad, unfortunately I don't have your family name, but Javad has proposed something about farm tourism and orchard tourism, which can be combined with garden tourism, because we use the word bagh both for orchard and garden. So it is something probably special for Iran, because normally the Persian gardens are productive lands. So it is maybe it is good to have a look at the idea of farm tourism plus orchard tourism plus garden tourism, something like that. What's your idea about that, Richard?
Javad, thank you for your question. Yes, I'm certainly not an expert on farm tourism. I've done some work on that. It's part and parcel of this. If you go to Iran, or you go to anywhere for that matter, you want a variety of experiences. And if you have something like a farm tourism, which really is quite unique, I suspect. I was a farm boy in England many years ago, so I know a little bit about farming. But my suspicion is much of what you grow in Iran, with whether they be tree crops or farming or even roses, with the it would really be an attraction in and of itself, but it adds part of that whole experience of Iran. There's going to be a whole dedicated bunch of people who just want to see the gardens, the great famous gardens of Iran. And my thanks to the lady madam that sent me the 56 gardens of Iran. I'll certainly follow up on that. But the idea that you can also go, if you do 2 hours in a garden or 3 hours in a garden, then on to a farm where you have a totally different experience. I think that's really valuable. That's what you need, value added. And so I think Javed's point is not only well taken, it's something that you could certainly pursue.
There is another suggestion probably, which is about development of a sort of health tourism with medicinal plants as a source of income and as a source of actually a type of tourism which is gaining more and more attention these days in Iran, a kind of therapeutic gardening or health tourism, something like that. This is the other idea from Mr. Abdullahpur.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just let me not be very nice. First of all, then I'll say that's just fine. But the first is that's what, of course, in tourism we call niche tourism. I'm always very interested in making money. I mean, that's what we get in America, as you know. And the idea that the gardens of Iran are so spectacular and so world renowned that they will drive the people to come and see them. That's the point. Health tourism is generally a niche that is not large numbers of people, and maybe not even cater to large numbers of people. So it may be something that you can do as an individual or a special experience for special types of tourists. But what's going to come to Iran are the are the gardens. It's not for the health benefits. They'll get the health benefits, but they don't not coming to that. Can I just add one other thing, Mahdi? Because I see another question on the thing about do you need a natural garden or do you need a cultivated garden? And my quick answer, this is to Ruth. I don't know where she is. I suspect she's in Kenya. Ruth, you can do both because garden tourism will take both. There's many examples of gardens that have these perfectly manicured gardens and then 500 acres of wilderness, for want of a better word, where you can see the natural plant life, flora and fauna in the natural. So it's not necessarily one or the other.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry.
That was the next question that I wanted to ask. Ruth, thank you very much for bringing that idea. Actually, Ruth has quoted something from your book that maybe the best gardens are those who are perfectly designed for that, and maybe the whole question would be around some type of garden that are not perfectly designed or are not in perfect shape for tourism. Probably that is the idea for a country like Kenya.
Then let me say, Maki, very quickly that if we were after a perfect garden for display purposes, I would get out of this business because my garden at home is not perfect, and I'm sure not everyone wants to see it. Could I just add one other thing? Is that given we have such a large number of people and a large number of comments, I would be perfectly willing to share my email address and answer each of them with anything specific they may have. That is perfectly acceptable to me, Mahdi, and you can certainly, on my behalf, provide them, or Armin, if you wish, with my email, and I will correspond.
Yes, thank you very much, and okay? thank you everyone for just bringing so many good ideas and so many good pieces of knowledge to our conversation. Thank you very much, Richard. It was a wonderful presentation, and I hope that we can follow up with the university or the Society for Landscape, or probably with the regional section of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, because I know that there are a lot of possibilities in the Middle East, not only in Iran, in many other countries in the Middle East. We have many possibilities, many opportunities to follow, and I very much suggest to have something like the Cultural Landscape Foundation regionally in Iran and in the Middle East to work on the specific issue of gardens and garden tourism. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.